there, friends. Good morning. I just woke up pretty much, and it is the last day of our July 4th weekend. And even though I had no plans, I somehow still managed to exhaust myself, so I will just be hanging out in my humble little abode for the day. I have no plans on stepping outside. Also, it's like 90 degrees again, so, pass. But anyways, I have been talking about the original 5 Planet of the Apes movies a lot recently, and while I still have that hamster on the wheel going, I'm gonna ride this one out for as long as I can. So, I was thinking about doing another re-ranking of the original 5 movies, but at the same time, I kept going back to 2 movies in the saga in particular, which I just found really much more interesting to talk about, mainly because people prefer to not talk about them. Again, for further context, I really love the original movies, and while the movies that came after that, maybe excluding the Burton one, they all have good things in them, namely the revolutionary CGI, and then of course, literally everything Andy Serkis says and does. Whenever I think Planet of the Apes, I have to watch the original movies. They're just my cup of tea. They do so much more for me than the new movies do. The new movies are solid. There's a very strong narrative in them. But the original films, they have something that the new ones do not. Just absolutely wackadoo whimsy and fantasy embedded through all of them. Each movie is wildly fantastical, tonally different, has a unique story, and the timeline is unlike anything we've seen in any other franchise, whether it be in film, video games, books, etc. The original Apes movies, as clunky and crazy as they are so unique and captivating. Obviously, the first one is the best, uncontestable, but the really unique thing about them is that I can't necessarily say any of the 4 movies that came after are necessarily better or worse than each other. They're all so different that it really just boils down to the viewer's preference. Some people prefer to just stop at 68, which I totally understand, stop at the original, but then others who care to go a little further, they could just kind of just pick and choose what their most favorite and least favorite of the sequels are. And I think that's really fun, because all of them bring something so new and interesting to the table that haven't been brought back since in film. I mean, one of the things that makes the Apes franchise so unique, again, is it's the first time that we had, a mega sci-fi franchise. This predates Star Wars, you could argue the Star Trek cinematic franchise. This was a big deal in its heyday, and this franchise walked, so all those other franchises we know now could run. So that being said, it does show its age in that it's so experimental and it's always trying new things. But as a result of that, we do have some movies in the fold which aren't necessarily up to par with the other films in those 5. But still, I think they're very good, and I'm mainly referring to Beneath the Planet of the Apes, the second movie, and the 5th movie, the last in the franchise, being Conquest for the... No, wait, not Conquest. I always get the 2 confused. I'm referring to Battle for the Planet of the Apes. And I wanted to make committed videos for each of them, but since they're both usually on the bottom of people's lists, I wanted to talk about both of them in a single video. I don't have a ton to say about each of them on their own, so that's why I just wanted to bucket them together. But while I still have thoughts fresh in my mind, especially since on my Player Display channel I did a committed Ursus tribute video, I wanted to just talk about them as thoroughly as I can. So let's start off with Beneath. This, for me, I'd say this movie is at the bottom of my ranking of the 5 movies. It's fun, and it's never boring. Again, keeping in the themes of just being fantastical, trying new things. But as a result of that, it's kind of its weakness. There are so many concepts, so many new characters and themes, that it just gets really messy from a directing standpoint. The biggest issue with this film is obviously Charlton Heston did not believe in the idea of sequels. He just wanted to show up for the first Apes movie. He sold it, and then after that, he was like, I'm done. But the studio insisted, no, come on, come back. Let's do another Apes movie. Strike while the iron's hot, And he's like, fine, I'll come back on the condition that Taylor have minimal screen time, and that he gets killed off at the end of the movie. The Alpha Omega bomb was his idea. He just wanted to blow up the Earth, so there's no way that Taylor could return. So as a result of that, we're instead following Brent, who is fine. The actor who portrays him, he does well enough. But at the same time, everyone knows that he's effectively just Taylor 2.0. He looks like him. He goes through the exact same plot beats as him. It's literally just Cliff's Notes of the first movie, squeezed in the first half of Beneath. So that instantly bogs down the overall narrative of what Beneath has to offer. And then, that being said, there are a whole bunch of other narratives after he goes through that track of realizing, oh, holy crap, this is Earth, the Earth that I came from. Then he stumbles onto the mutant layer. And the mutants I'm kind of wishy-washy on. I like them conceptually. I think that's why a lot of people return to this movie. The mutants are interesting in that you do have this society of human beings which live underground and have been surviving with their intellect intact and evolved over the past 2,000 plus years. But I kind of draw the line at the telekinetic stuff with the visions and the bleeding lawgiver. I mean, it's a great vision and all, but I think it's a little too berserk for the series. I mean, even though I love the fantastical elements, I do prefer that it stay grounded within the science fiction restraints that the other movies continue with going forward, and with the one movie that came before. And then also, character termination with Nova. I don't like the way that they treated her in this movie. In the first movie, she didn't have a whole ton to do, but she was important in that she acted as not only a reminder of what humanity has become in this topsy-turvy world, but also she acts as Taylor's anchor. She's his one semblance of hope throughout this crazy film. But in Beneath, she's a little more crucial to the plot. If I say that loosely, she's kind of just an ex machina in that she's the only way that Brent is able to learn, oh, holy crap, she has Taylor's dog tags, therefore Taylor landed here too. Maybe Nova knows a few more things about this ape planet that I don't. And then, yeah, she kind of helps to lead him around back to Ape City, and then they go venture together into the mutant lair. But after that, she just has the absolute shit knocked out of her. She's telekinetically beat up by Brent twice, and then she finally speaks, which is a whole other, can of worms, a whole plot hole for this film and the franchise. And then right after that, she gets blown away, and she's dead. Taylor loses hope, Brent dies, and then Taylor blows up the entire planet. So overall, this movie is a complete mess thematically and narratively and directing-wise. So it's got its problems, but there's still a lot of charm in it. But that being said, the one thing that I think is really great in this movie, and I didn't even consider this until I did that Ursus edit a few days ago, which I've been watching on loop, as I do, is General Ursus and his rapport with Dr. Zaius. This is, I think, one of the best arcs in the entire franchise that people don't really talk about enough. The thing is, after I was rewatching the footage of Ursus when I was compiling that edit, I studied his movements and the way that he was alluding to Zaius a lot more closely, and I noticed a dynamic that I never caught before. Again, being someone who's watched these movies throughout the past maybe 10 years, maybe a little more than that, and I noticed that there was such this manipulative behavior that Ursus was superimposing onto Zaius. And to go back to Zaius, I mean, in the first movie, he's one of my favorite cinematic antagonists of all time. I wouldn't say villains, because he wasn't necessarily killing people or anything. He's not the traditional villain, right? He's simply a withholder of information, and in that, he hinders Taylor's journey. And then you can also argue Cornelius and Zira as well, who are barely in Beneath, but that's aside from the point. So the thing about Zaius that we ultimately learn is he does not enjoy making Taylor's journey so difficult. I mean, obviously he's heavily prejudiced towards him and humankind, but he doesn't love causing problems for intellectually stronger humans or apes. He just knows that if these two parties learn about each other, both could be in heavy jeopardy, and he has to keep this information under wraps. He blows up that cave, seals off the information with the doll and the fossil records and all of that. So that's what we know about him. But then we go into Beneath, and then we get this whole other layer to this character, which is alluded to in the first movie, but in the second movie, very subtly explored through this new character, General Ursus. Ursus is a die-hard extremist. He just hates humans straight up. He believes they're cattle. He believes they need to be purged. Even if he doesn't have the same knowledge that Zaius does, being that he's probably not the type of guy who just goes through the scrolls every day. That's not really his duty. He's a guerrilla. He's a militiaman, die-hard, kill everything kind of guy. The only good human is a dead human. That's his mantra. That's his strongest line throughout this entire movie, arguably. Among several other lines that he says that hit really hard in that first monologue. But as he's saying this monologue, one of the most underplayed elements of it that I noticed when I was combing through the footage to make that edit is he, at one point, he says, oh, the humans who are lucky enough to not be killed by us and be captured, they'll be put in the captivity of our good Dr. Zaius. And right in that moment, Maurice Evans, raises his eyebrows, wait, me? What? Wait, whoa, I'm involved now? And then ultimately, this culminates in him being involved in Ursus's conquest into the Forbidden Zone to find out there's other sentient humans. Let's figure out what the hell they are and just wipe them out. And even Zaius, throughout this entire ordeal, in that monologue, going down that journey to see the hallucinations with the fire and the bleeding lawgiver and all that nonsense, and then seeing the destruction of the Forbidden Zone, then going down to see the mutants being purged, and then, he takes part in, destroying the statues of their historical figures, we can only assume. But throughout this whole thing, he's just mortified. He's like, this is a whole micro-genocide all on its own, and I don't want to be part of this. So here, we're realizing that the main antagonist of the first movie, even he has some semblance of limits. I mean, at the end of the movie, he still confirms, humans are garbage, and everything that just happened is proof that they cannot be domesticated, they cannot be taught right from wrong. He still has those convictions. But does he want to take part in the act of watching them being totally wiped out? No, he's not ready for that. I don't think he ever kills a single human being on his own accord. I mean, maybe he, instructed folks in the first movie, perhaps in the second, to, move around human beings, lobotomize Landon, in the first film. He confirmed that. He did do that, but he's never the guy to get hands-on, right? So this movie, through Ursus's dogma, through his actions, he digs up a whole other side to Zaius' personality. He's not nearly as prominent as he was in the first film, but we do get more of his personality in this underutilized and understated arc within Beneath. I'd enjoy Beneath a lot more if Zaius and Ursus were the main characters, because I think their story was borderline perfect. I loved what they did with Ursus and Zaius a lot, and next time I rewatch Beneath, I'm really going to be focusing on their rapport, what they do throughout this movie, because I think they're the strongest point, and no one talks about them enough. That being said, is Beneath a great movie? No, I would never say that. It's got a lot of mechanical issues, a lot of story problems, and it does create plot holes, again, especially with Nova speaking. What does that say about the first movie, retroactively, right? So there are still a lot of issues with this movie, and it's still at the bottom of my list when it comes to what is the best of the original 5 Apes movies. But that's really all I have to say about Beneath. Cult classic for a reason. Really great ideas, including Ursus and Zaius. But again, like everything else in the film, it just gets lost because there's so much going on. That being said, though, it's never boring. So I will cap that one off, and we will move on to the next movie that I want to talk about here. Second half of this ramble, we're going to have to jump way back in time, Huey Lewis style, because as we know, Beneath the Planet of the Apes, that's in the year 3950 something, as Zira tells us in Escape. And then we go back in time with Zira, Cornelius, and Milo, and then the events of Escape and Conquest play out And of course, we know how that winds up. Our lead apes unfortunately perish, but they leave Milo slash Caesar behind. And obviously, you know, he's my favorite character in the whole franchise. One of my favorite characters in movies. Though I wouldn't necessarily say he's in the best movies in this franchise or in my favorite movies of all time, being Conquest and Battle. But the one movie that I really wanted to talk about here is Battle. For basically everyone, and if it's not the Burton movie, then Battle is at the very bottom of their list. And I can tell you why, and it makes sense why. This movie, you could say this about all the movies in the five. With each installment, they have less budget than the ones that came before. So the creators had to get a lot more creative. They had to improvise in terms of telling a good narrative with the bare necessities that they were working with. So that takes us to Battle, and of course that gets the sharp end of the stick. It's the last movie in the franchise, therefore by proxy, it's got the smaller budget. And a lot of people, that's the issue they have with this film. It's very small scale. There's not a whole lot of crazy elaborate sets. Really all you get is a forest. Then you have, like, I guess a matte painting of the ruined New York skyline. It has to be New York, right? Because it's implied that the mutants who live there also have the bombs. So they're the mutants we see 2,000 years later. And then you have, like, these industrial tight hallways that Cornelius, McDonald's brother, weird little plot point there, and Virgil, who I really love, are walking through to get information about Caesar's parents, and then they can escape, and then they draw the ire of the mutants, and then that leads into the titular battle of this movie. But basically, all those points said, it's basically to say the reason why people do not like Battle is because of how small the story is in terms of scope and in terms of importance compared to the four movies that came before. No matter how you feel about the other four movies, all of them are a lot more impactful on a global scale, at least in terms of what we're presented with. So when it comes to Battle, everything just feels like it's not a big, bombastic conclusion to this saga. I think that is the main crux of the issue for most viewers. But I actually have a good counter-argument to that. Like I said earlier in this video, this is the first bigwig sci-fi franchise. So this set the standard of what a sci-fi franchise can be. I mean, maybe if you exclude, like, Universal Monster stuff, but it was kind of doing its own thing. It was very episodic in that way. It was never at any point trying to raise the stakes. It was just trying to ride it out as long as it could, right? And so was the Apes franchise, but the thing about it is it had a very advanced timeline. It had a very complex narrative. It really wanted to keep one-upping itself. But then again, that's a theme that we see more predominantly shown in later franchises, Star Wars especially, where there always has to be a bigger battle, there always has to be a huge climax, you know. That's just a modern expectation. With any film franchise, there has to be that ending crescendo to wrap up a film, to wrap up a trilogy, you know what I mean? But I actually really love Battle because it's not that. It's small. It's barely a battle at all. It's just like a quick 5-minute skirmish between Caesar and the Apes and the mutants. The mutants come in. Then Caesar very cleverly plays possum with the rest of his posse. Then they all hop up, catch mutants off guard, and they let them run back to their home. But that's all for naught, because Aldo just charges in, no prisoners, and kills them all. And Aldo I also really enjoy as a character, but he's not necessarily what I want to talk about in this particular video. The reason why I think Battle works is simply because of the way that it's framed, very creatively so. This movie doesn't open straight with Aldo running in with the horse into the ape village, which is a scene I really love personally. This movie opens and concludes with the lawgiver teaching a group of students, apes and humans, about a story of Caesar. This movie is not meant to be a grand finale. It's not meant to take everything we know about the entire Apes universe at this point and absolutely wrap it up with a giant fight and huge, massive set pieces. That's not what this movie's trying to do, and due to the budget, they couldn't do that if they wanted to. What this movie is, boil it down, it's a folktale. By this point in time, when the lawgiver is teaching these students, this is hundreds of years in the future. Caesar's dead. He could have died of age. He could have died in a fight. We don't know. But by this point, there are so many little stories about him that are being relayed to ape and humankind. And, we're not sure if these stories are necessarily true or not, because, as you talked about in previous videos, Caesar represents a game of telephone. The history gets warped and confused over time. Like, again, reiterate, in Escape, Cornelius cites the story of Aldo and how Aldo said no and changed the course of history for apes from that point forward. But we know that's not true, as we see in Conquest. Lisa said no, and Aldo was the idiot, that one of Caesar's greatest enemies, especially in battle. That's the movie we're talking about now. So history gets a little messed up over time. But that being said, here we have the iteration of one of many myths or folk tales about who Caesar was. And the way that the lawgiver presents him, and we can presume other people are trying to teach students in this timeline, they're trying to present Caesar not just as this big, great hero who knows everything and fights the big fights, wins the big wars. He's simply just another ape who has a lot to learn. The story of battle is that, of course, Caesar is so very conflicted, so very prejudiced about, humans are rotten, they're terrible, they're self-destructive, and he's still deep set in his ways, and he has a lot to learn. But throughout the course of these, sorry, I'm not tearing up because, like the end of the movie, I got the fan on me, and I need to clean the thing up, it's a little dusty, so ignore that. But the thing about this movie is, throughout this journey of him, he's trying to justify his convictions that humans, they're never going to change, they're never going to improve. But then, of course, this all culminates, jumping ahead here, we learn that Aldo killed his son because his son overheard plans for a coup against his father. And we learn that Aldo severed the branch, Cornelius fell to his death. Well, he was more in a comatose state, and then he died later on from probably internal stuff. We don't see anything visually because that would be a little much for the time, obviously. So Caesar caves into his vengeance, and doesn't really kill Aldo, more so just chases him up a tree and he falls to his death. Well, I guess Caesar kind of pushed him, but because Aldo was trying to get a swing on him with his blade, so I guess it's in self-defense, right? But as McDonald's brother puts it, and in this moment, Caesar's joining the human race. He gives into his vengeance, and as he said towards the very beginning of the film, he wonders if his parents were still alive, would they tell him, would it be okay to kill evil? And that's a question he still isn't totally sure of by the end of the movie. And that's what the lawgiver iterates. This is another story about a man who we all really value, but it's still important that we know that he's just another ape. He's just another ape with flaws, with prejudices, with questions, and he probably lived his entire life with that, never being totally sure, always teetering between, can humanity and apes work together, or are we just doomed to be enemies? And that's why the ending shot of that film, with the lawgiver statue probably being Caesar tearing up, is so significant. Because it's such an ambiguous note. Will humans come together, and is this a tear of joy? Or is Caesar certain that there's just no chance? And that's what makes this whole movie so fascinating. But again, the main point that I'm bringing up here is the fact that this movie is really fascinating as a series wrap-up, and that it's not trying to be a big battle. Rather, it's simply a folktale of the Messiah ape who is still never going to be perfect. He's just as ground level as everyone else. He's not a holy figure. He's in no way divine or omniscient. He's just as flawed, and he will always be flawed. He will always have more questions until he inevitably dies like anyone else does, because he too is also not immortal. He passes away somehow, again, whether it be through natural causes or through some other skirmish in the future, we don't know. But at this point, we don't really have to know. We just know he's just as flawed, just as confused as everybody else in this timeline. And I think that's what makes this movie so great, amongst other reasons. And then you have Virgil. I really love the way that Virgil's written. Even he, like when they're in the industrial underground of the dead city, he actually goes on a tangent of multiversal theory. He's like, we're in this room right now. If you leave right now, we could be shot. If you leave 5 minutes from now, we could be all right. And then he says a quote that I love: "It's a blind choice, but you can't change lanes." So he kind of speaks to what all the movies are trying now with, like, all the multiversal stuff, alternate universes, parallel dimensions. He brings quantum theory into this movie very subtly. I think for the first time of all movies that have ever been done, this is the first time that a character brings up the notion of that prospect. And that fits in line with these movies. Again, we have a very broken and crazy nonlinear timeline with Zero and Cornelius going back in time. They leave Caesar behind. And then, are we in an alternate world where he can change the course of history? Or is history locked in place, and despite all his efforts, is there nothing that he can do to bring humanity and apes together? Yeah, and otherwise, I just like the small scale and enjoy it for what it is. I like how it does kind of feel a little bit made for TV. You kind of had that little relationship between his wife and his son, and just seeing that little lived-in village that these apes are building. Kind of prototypical, not yet that sandy landscape that we'd see 2,000 years later, roughly. I enjoy that. It's a different view of this very, very early ape society. Again, you could still poke holes into it, and rightfully so. Like, would it make sense for this ape village to exist so quick after we saw that big city landscape in Conquest? Yeah, that's a tough pill to swallow. Again, this is one of those areas where these movies take very creative liberties, really stretch things out in order to make these little stories happen. But again, I'm okay with it. These movies are fun. All of them have interesting concepts. Even Beneath, which I put at the bottom of my list. Ursus and Zeus are absolutely enthralling. I love watching how they talk together. And I love Zeus getting a taste of his own medicine, seeing, whoa, this is the full extent of what apes can do against humans, and I don't want to go this far. Ursus can do what he wants, but I don't want to be there to see it, so that's a whole other perspective. But yeah, I love and adore these movies. To wrap up, like, the first movie is always going to be my number one. But as for the next four, I can't really properly rank them because all of them are trying to do something so fascinating. They're all so fantastical. They're all bringing in new ideas. And the tone always varies. There's different characters. And I love it for that. It's not trying to just stay on a single track, aside from preserving a really unique timeline. And at the end of the day, like, yeah, there's issues with it, sure, when you really closely inspect it, but again, it's the very first sci-fi franchise, and maybe it was trying to be too ambitious for its own good, but it's such a ride. I really love these movies, and I say this at the end of every video where I talk about these films. If you haven't watched them, I implore you to check them out. They really are a lot of fun. There's going to be some movies that you really adore. There's going to be ones that don't really work for you. And you know what? That's kind of the beauty of it. But at the end of the day, none of them are too slow. All of them give you something new. I know I'm sounding like a broken record, but that's usually a sign for me in these videos to wrap up. So thank you guys very much for watching. Let me know what you think about the Apes movies below. Let me know if you enjoy or dislike these movies, specifically Beneath and Battle. What are your perspectives on them? Again, I love them both, maybe as much as the other two sequels that are in the mix. Again, the first one's always going to be at the top for me, but then the four I mean, again, I said beneath is at the bottom for me, but even that's kind of interchangeable, just on the sheer wackiness that it takes on. So, yeah, that's what I got. So I hope you pulled a little something from this, and I hope you can teach me something too in the comments as well. Because, like Caesar, even though he is like the guy who's teaching all the lessons and stuff, he too has a lot to learn by the very end of the saga. So, that's all I got to say. Hope you enjoy the rest of your weekend, and I will see you in the next video, whatever that might be. So,